You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm happy to bring back to the Goldstein on Gelt show Yoram Ettinger. He's been on the show before. If you missed those discussions, you can download the podcast at goldsteinongelt.com or check out the videos on our YouTube channel. Yoram, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you very much.
Yoram's an expert lecturer on U.S. politics, U.S. Israeli relations, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and he's the director of an organization called Second Thought. In the past, he's talked to us about the U.S. Israeli relationship, but now it's getting a little strained because of the issue of Iran. Could you just talk to us a little bit about how serious is this danger?
Well, the threat of Iran is very clear, present, and I would say almost lethal, and primarily to American and Western interest, as well as Israel, and it's primarily a threat to the U.S. because the aim of Iran has always been domination of the Gulf. The major obstacle on the way of Iran attaining that goal has been U.S. military presence in the Gulf, and Iran is developing its super capability in order to advance its super goal and to intimidate its super obstacle, the USA. Once there is a nuclear Iran, there could be a meltdown of the pro-U.S. regimes in the Gulf. None of them would be a match to the military power of Iran. Once there is a nuclear Iran, there would be devastation as far as the supply of oil, as far as the price of oil. Anybody who's concerned about the impact of a military preemption upon the price of oil should realize that that concern would be dwarfed by a nuclear Iran torpedoing the supply of oil, intimidating oil producers in the Gulf, and being able to set the pace of supply and the price of oil. Once there is a nuclear Iran, that would bolster tremendously the already existing Iranian beachheads in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Mexico. What would stop the unpredictable Hugo Chavez from inviting Iran to deploy some nuclear systems to Venezuela, namely America's own backyard? And certainly once there is a nuclear Iran, we're talking about a major nuclear proliferation because Turkey will not be able to stay behind Iran. Egypt would not tolerate a nuclear Iran. The Saudis, if they survive, they probably would acquire nuclear capabilities from Pakistan. Before we know it, there is a major devastating proliferation of nuclear capabilities among potentially unstable and rogue regimes throughout the Middle East and beyond the Middle East. And last and not least, Iran is the major supporter of Islamic international terrorism. What would a nuclear dawn of international Islamic terrorism do to the scores of sleeper cells in the U.S. and therefore to U.S. homeland security and U.S. national security?
Okay, so let's look at the bigger picture and just look back several decades when the fear was that the Soviet Union would put nuclear weapons in just off Florida. At that time, the President of America took a fairly strong stance and stopped that. Couldn't we expect the same of the U.S. vis-a-vis Venezuela now?
Well, that assumes that you can refer to Iran the same way you referred to the old USSR. As radical as the old USSR was, it was nothing like the current regime of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. We're talking about a regime which during the war against Iraq between 1980 and 1986 was willing to sacrifice 500,000 of its own children, teenagers, in order to clear minefields between Iran and Iraq. A regime which is willing to sacrifice its own youth for the sake of a victory over a military enemy should not be treated as a reasonable opponent. It's a devastating enemy which should be expected to act irrationally the way we define rational behavior in Western circles.
We are talking to Yoram Ettinger, who is the executive director of Second Thought, a U.S. Israel initiative. He's also formerly a minister for Congressional Affairs at Israel's embassy in Washington, D.C., dealing with bilateral commercial, military, and diplomatic ties and foreign aid. Yoram, I'd like to follow up a little more about the risks as far as Israel goes. Obviously, the discussion we're having so far is something that is in the newspaper every day, and the Prime Minister of Israel is out there talking about it. What effect has this huge risk had upon investment in Israel?
Well, in fact, I would say none. If we look and we assess the flow of overseas investments into Israel, it has in fact accelerated in recent months. Just to share with you and with the listeners the very recent data, we're talking about Abbott Laboratories, which just concluded a 3-year cooperation agreement with Israel's Weizmann Institute. They bought, by the way, an Israeli company in 2010. We're talking about Credit Suisse of Switzerland. They just reported the holding of 5.5% of a major Israeli giant, Checkpoint. 5.5% of Checkpoint is $643 million. We're talking about major investment banks in France and Germany investing in Israel. We're talking about Deutsche Telekom, France Telecom, which recently led a $15 million round of private placements in young Israeli startups.
Okay, so this is very positive, all of these stories you're
Absolutely.
telling us. Doesn't this suggest that the market as a whole doesn't in fact believe that we are going to have a war here in the Middle East?
Well, the market certainly does not believe that. The market relies on either the U.S. or Israel to take charge. The market does not really believe that either U.S. or Israel would tolerate a nuclear Iran. And it's up to the leaders primarily of the U.S. as well as of Israel to prove the market right. One more thing when it comes to Israel, and that's, I believe, the main test. Is there a long-term confidence or just a short-term confidence? Currently, Intel is expanding its already 6 plants which it has in Israel. They are now employing 7,800 persons, and they just announced an intention to hire few more hundred people. They are now expanding one of the plants by the investment of $2.5 billion. That reflects long-term confidence in the capability of Israel when it comes to economics as well as national security.
Do you think that perhaps these countries are very hopeful because of the sanctions? Clearly we've seen an increase, even though Iran seems to have friends in China and in Russia, having the ability to do international commerce be completely cut off. Maybe this really will have a positive effect, no?
Well, sanctions by definition cannot be effective. In order to have effective sanctions, you must have effective collaboration. Axiomatically, Russia and China, two rivals of the U.S., are not going to cooperate fully with sanctions, and they have not. India and Japan have never collaborated with sanctions against Iran for economic reasons, as has Turkey. And quite frankly, I don't trust most of the Europeans. There's no consistency between talking the talk and walking the walk when it comes to sanctions, and the proof is in the pudding. There have been sanctions for the last 10 years, and Iran is much closer today than it was 10 years ago to becoming a nuclear power, and the track record tells us not to trust sanctions. When we look at North Korea, 40 years of sanctions against North Korea could not stop North Korea from becoming a nuclear power.
So if there is some sort of military action against Iran, is it possible that some of these other countries would in fact come to their aid?
Well, absolutely not. And again, one should differentiate between talking the talk and walking the walk. Arabs in the Persian Gulf are vying for U.S. military action or Israeli military action, because should there be a nuclear Iran, this would be a lethal, an immediate, clear presence, devastating, lethal threat to the survival of every single Arab regime in the Persian Gulf, and I would say, and beyond, in the Middle East as well. And just as it was, by the way, in the 67 war, when Israel devastated Egypt and therefore Saudi Arabia rejoiced, so it will be when either the U.S. or Israel devastate Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The first element to rejoice would be Saudi Arabia, and then Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Oman, and basically the rest of the Arab world.
Okay, so in the last minute, let me just ask you, do you think it's a question of if there will be an attack against Iran, or is it only a matter of when? And if it's when?
Well, I think the question is if, not concerning an attack, is there a backbone ruling policy in Washington and D.C., or isn't there a backbone there? Is there a policy led by conviction or by convenience? I believe that intellectually, definitely in Israel, but increasingly in Washington, there is realization that one cannot coexist with a nuclear Iran. The big question is there also a backbone behind that realization?
And do we need the U.S. to do it, or could Israel do it on its own?
U.S. can do it very, very effectively because of its military presence in the Gulf, but should there be a need, Israel, as it has in the past, will prove once again that when it comes to high-tech as well as military, never underestimate Israeli creativity.
Okay. Yoram Ettinger, the Executive Director of Second Thought, the U.S. Israel Initiative. I'd like to thank you again for being on the show. If you missed his previous interviews, you can download the podcasts at goldsteinongelt.com or just check it out on YouTube. Yoram, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.